Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Patty. I go by Pattymac Makes everywhere online. In today's video, we are going to make a really pretty, super easy fabric napkin. Fabric napkins are great. They will save you money in the long run because you use them and you can wash them with your regular laundry. Super easy, and they are so cute. They will perk up any table. In the past, I have shared a dinner napkin tutorial for you where we made the napkins utilizing a mitered corner, which is very pretty. It can be a little bit fiddly because you've got to press, and then you've got to make measurements and lines and this and that and the other. With this, all we're going to do is use a seam gauge and double fold our raw edge of the fabric and stitch it down, and that's it. Then we've got our napkins ready to go. And you can make it a couple of ways. So if you want a more fancy-ish formal dinner napkin, you can cut that from yardage. You're going to cut it at 20 by 20 squares. They're large. So I would use those for like your Thanksgiving dinner, your Christmas dinner, Easter dinner, stuff like that. Special birthday party, things like that. For everyday use, seriously, go to Joann and go to the quilting cotton wall and look at the abundance of fat quarters. For today's video, that's what we're going to use. We're going to use fat quarters, and we're going to make a super cute mismatched fabric napkins, and I think you'll love this project. It is great for gifts. So let me just give you a little heads up on that. We're moving into the season where we're thinking about gift giving, and you can do Christmas specific napkins. I have a really cute tutorial for making Christmas tree shaped napkins. I'll link to that for you. But those, are so specific, and then they're going to be really nice, and you know how people are. If you give them something really nice, they don't want to use it. So if you just go with the fat quarters, ta-da, they'll be more likely to use them. So, okay, without further ado, let's jump into today's tutorial. The first thing we'll do is to open our fat quarter. And as we open it up, we're going to find out that it's pretty wrinkled, and inside it's going to have a little card. And so we'll just put that little card to the side. We can use it for something else. But the first thing is to give this fat quarter a good press and a good starch. Okay, that's better. Now that our fabric is pressed and starched, we will need to do a little bit of a trim to get everything nice and squared up. And when I say squared up, we're not making the fabric square. It means that we are squaring the grain line to the cross grain. I always cut on the longest width of the fat quarter, which is the approximately 22-inch measurement. So the first thing I'll do is line it up the best I can, and I'm going to take off the edge with selvage. And your first cut is the pickiest cut, so really take your time with that. I'm using my 6.5 by 24.5 inch creative grids quilting ruler along with my rotary cutter. So we take off from the one long side. Now we're flipping the fabric around. We're going to the other long side, the opposite side. This project, what we're going to be constantly doing is working opposite sides. And you can see I'm taking it down to the 21 inches. Now we're going to turn the fabric and get the narrow measurement, which is 18 inches. And typically on the fat quarter, it's very close to the 18 inches. So you're really just going to be kind of shaving a little bit of a hair of fabric off each side, but it does make a difference when it comes time to get your grain and cross grain nice and square to each other. And the reason you do that is because when you are folding the fabric to sew the hems, it makes a much more square corner. Just trust me, it looks better. Okay, now we'll do the last trim. And you can see, I mean, it's just like just taking that whisker off. So we'll take the whisker off and then we'll be ready to head over to the ironing board. On the ironing board, we're going to use our seam gauge to turn the hem. And I have mine set for 3/8 of an inch. And this is a pretty standard technique that you'll see in a whole lot of sewing projects. And we call it encasing the raw edge. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold our fabric over. We're using our seam gauge to make sure that we're nice and even all the way across. And then we're pressing in that fold. And we're going to do that all the way across. And also note that I am working on one of the short ends. So this is like an 18-inch length that we're pressing in here. The 18-inch side, I should say. Also, a really good steam iron is your friend when you're doing this. And now we're going to fold the fabric again, and you can see now that the raw edge is actually tucked inside. So you can use that little seam gauge to get it just right, but once you've done this a few times, you will be able to kind of feel where the edge of the fabric is, and you won't have to be quite as critical in checking it. But it's always good, at least at the front and at the end, that you make sure you're right on the money. The big thing is when you're at those edges, you make sure that as you're folding over, it meets nice and neat. Like, you don't want to have a bunch of fabric hanging over that raw edge. We want that to be as nice and squared up as possible. And we're going to press that into place. And then I like to use the Wonder Clips to just hold everything as is. So that's one side. We're going to do the other side the exact same way, the opposite end. And then we're going to head over to the sewing machine. At the sewing machine, I like to use the tab method that is very common in quilt piecing. And I do this because with this project, it's very important that you sew actually completely off the edges. And the easiest way to get that right is to use the tabs like we do in quilting. You're going to be doing an edge stitch. So you want to sew as close to that folded edge as possible. The point of this stitching is to hold that hem in place. You can see I'm using the seam ripper as like a stiletto to hold the end of that seam in place. And I do that so that as the seam is heading under the machine needle, it stays right where I want it. That our first two seams are in place, we're heading back to the ironing board and we're going to do the same procedure where we're turning the raw edge over and we're using that same 3/8 inch measurement on the seam gauge. So now we're working on the longer side, which is the 21-inch side. So same thing, just carefully press in your hem. And when you do this part of the project, this is where you really want to be super careful about getting your edges perfectly squared up, because that will make the neatest possible look for your finished napkins. So you can see how I'm folding that over, and I'm being very, very careful to make sure that the fabric is perfectly square. And I can like feel where that little fabric from the raw edge is inside, and so I can just sort of turn that over. And again, use the Wonder Clips to hold everything in place so that nothing moves. And do one side and then the opposite side. And then we'll come back to the sewing machine and put it all in place. And here's the finished napkin, and oh gosh, isn't it beautiful? So one tip I'll give you is that you will want to backstitch on the start and the end when you sew the long edge of the napkin, so the 21-inch side. Definitely backstitch off and on the napkin on that long edge. And that's all there is to making these really fun hemmed dinner napkins. I love this method. So you just want to take your time. You want to make sure that your fabric is cut perfectly square, and you want to make sure that as you're pressing your folds and getting all of that together, that everything on the edges is beautiful and square and lines up really well. That will make your finished piece look really professional and really pretty. And I always feel like taking that little bit of extra time before we commit the fabric to the sewing machine, it's well worth it. They say on, I forget the program, but he always said measure twice, cut once. And it's the same thing in sewing and quilting. Take your time on that front end and get all your bits and pieces just perfectly balanced and square. And when you do the commitment, the sewing, the piecing, you have a beautiful finished result. That's today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will sew an abundance of beautiful fat quarter or larger dinner napkins for your family and for your friends. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.